and this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold, arms and or legs often go to sleep, sharp diagonal crease in the earlobe, short walks cause cramping or pains in legs, memory is not as good as it used to be, ankles swell late in the day, chest pain after physical exercise or emotional stress. If you experience even one of these symptoms, your circulatory system is crying out for attention. Extendivite is a natural solution to help improve your overall health. Extendivite is not your average heart tonic. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show. What is today? Today is Sunday. I have the wrong show name up. Today is... Oh, well, I got some feedback. Hold on one second. Let me get rid of that feedback. I watch Netflix at night, and then I max my speaker, and then I forget about it. Here we go. Okay. Welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at revolution.radio, and I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, and today we have a very special guest, Paul Eno, and he's one half of a father-son team of the CBS Radio and WOON, WOON, 1240 AM, Boston, Worcester, Providence Sunday destination show called Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. And it just celebrated its 10th year on air and has an estimated 3 million listeners. And together they have a combined experience of over 60 years in paranormal research. These two supernatural adventures are among the pioneers of the theory that UFOs, ghosts, and poltergeist phenomena, cryptids, and other areas of the paranormal are very closely connected. And they are joint authors of Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and Behind the Paranormal, 2 Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard of. And Paul's the author or co-author of more than 10 other books on paranormal and historical subjects. And so Paul was one of the first paranormal investigators of the early 70s while he was studying for the priesthood. Oh, goodness. And his early mentors included parapsychology pioneer Dr. Louisa Rhine and John Nicola who was a technical advisor for the film The Exorcist, and the legendary first-generation ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren. And Paul graduated from 2 seminaries, but was expelled from a third because of his paranormal work, with less than 2 years to go before ordination. And so anyway, I guess, I don't know, if he was Catholic, I guess we wouldn't have his son, Ben. So Ben's grateful that Dad didn't continue that. So let me bring on Sasha before I bring you on, Paul. And Sasha, are you there? Sound check. How are you today, dear?
I'm sound and I'm checked and ready to listen and learn. Thank you.
All right. So, Paul, welcome to our shows. How are you doing today? And you're in New England.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me, Janet and Sasha. And good evening from deepest, darkest New England.
Deepest, darkest New England. And so, of course, New England is the most ideal, one of the most ideal places to study the paranormal, because they have ghosts. That's where we started this country. So there's some ghosts that have been there for a long time. But I'm going to let you lead the way here, and we'll follow you and track you. What would you like to begin telling our listeners about yourself, about your work? And we'll listen for about 10, 15 minutes or so, and then we'll interrupt you with some questions. How's that?
Fair enough. Okay. Well, it's been a long road. Next year it'll be 50 years that I've been doing this. It was probably to start at the very beginning, and this, as you can imagine, is not easy to talk about. But when I was 7 years old in 1961, I witnessed my father's suicide. And at the time, my brother was studying to be a priest. We were, my father was, it was a mixed marriage. My father was a garden variety Protestant, and my mother was a Roman Catholic, although from a Yankee family, pretty much. So, and there was one lonely French connection. That's how the Catholicism got in there. So I was in second grade, and they were teaching us things like, you eat a hot dog on Friday, or you commit suicide, you go straight to hell. So I was very confused. And I said, this wonderful man, did he go to hell? And I had, because of the Sisters of Mercy, I wouldn't necessarily believe the name, but some of them were saints, others were potential axe murderers, the women in black, with all due respect to their service. But fortunately, I had one of the saints, Sister Mary Joel. She was, she got me through this. And she said essentially, in so many words, God is bigger than all that. So, it really helped. So as years went by, I only 7 more years, I entered the seminary myself at the age of 14, when you could still do that. Fortunately, you cannot. You have to develop a little bit of emotional maturity first, but not.
Yes.
Yeah. So in any case, one of the questions that haunted me, so to speak, was, where is my father? And in the early days, of course, you're at the high school level. You're not studying a lot of heavy theology or anything. It's the usual subjects, languages, math, English. It's an accredited education, so you study the core stuff. However, in the back of my mind, I wondered, this doctrine of purgatory. It's kind of unique to Roman Catholicism, and it's the idea that if you are not quite bad enough to go to hell and not quite good enough to go to heaven, you go to purgatory to be, purged, hence the name, to then get into heaven and also satisfy the pathological Western need to pigeonhole everything and pin it down to make you think you control it. So although that's not the official doctrine. Anyway, and I thought maybe these ghosts people report, and at my house where this terrible event had occurred, it was very peaceful. The assumptions are that you'd have all kinds of problems and there'd be, clanking of chains and stomping of feet, and there was none of that. So I thought that maybe these people who are in purgatory are actually the quote unquote earthbound spirits that are so prevalent in the folklore and in the experience, really much everywhere in the world, in every culture throughout history, one way or the other, under one term or another. So I started on that, and in 1970, I discovered a case. It was in the local paper. When it was in October, usually around, of course, actually it was in June. You'd think it would be in October around Halloween, but it was an overgrown settlement that was long deserted in northeast Connecticut, which is a very quiet corner of the state. And there was an old man who had been taking pictures there since the 1940s, and he was the local historian. And push came to shove, and he had a lot of odd photos. And there were a lot of rumors of strange sounds there. So some of this might be an interesting place to start researching this purgatory thing. So in 1971, after a lot of preparation, several of my fellow seminary students and I went to this little abandoned village in Pomfret, Connecticut, which I'm sure you probably never heard of, a lovely little town. And Harry Chase, the local historian, met us, and he guided us through through this area. Beg your pardon. And he immediately we began to notice odd things. There were sounds as of farm implements banging together. You could hear cows, dogs, people talking, and there was literally nothing there. There was nothing within half a mile, because we took a very systematic approach and mapped everything out. But from the get-go, there were all these odd sounds. Among the many things that happened there were the sounds of children, which is very, very odd. It was almost like electronic voice phenomena in reverse. We attempted to record it, and we had the state-of-the-art technology at the time, which was a cassette tape recorder. And we stood there, and we all heard these voices of children laughing, rapidly moving up and down a brook, as if they were traveling at about 60 miles an hour back and forth. Very strange. And we found immediately that the spatial relationships of these phenomena can be very odd. So then at another point on the second expedition, there was an ox cart, apparently, that went by. It sounded so real that we got out of the way. And we heard it. We heard the wooden wheels, the hoofbeats. We heard a team driver yelling, "Yah!" and the crack of a whip. And we couldn't see it. And it just kept going. And that has been reported by several people. So it immediately threw me into confusion. I mean, these people showed no sign of being dead at all, never mind being in purgatory. And it started me on a long quest, wondering maybe the old ideas we have about ghosts being dead people just aren't good enough. And as time went by in the 70s, I was running into the people seeing ghosts of themselves, people seeing ghosts of people who hadn't died yet. And I began to wonder, maybe this has more to do with time, or space-time, as Einstein would say, than it does with anybody being dead. And I sort of rejected rather early on the sort of the 19th century, what I consider two-dimensional approach to what this is, and got into a whole new approach to the thing, and of course I was preceded in this by someone I hadn't heard of yet, and that's Jacques Vallée, who brilliant scholar, and of course John Keel as well, who got into the idea of window areas. You literally open the window, all kinds of stuff comes in from somewhere or somewhere else. So this was kind of the beginning. And what really took the giddy biscuit was in 1979, a case in Maine. And I was just out of graduate school and had nothing, and ended up living in a little cottage by a lake in Connecticut. And the phone rang, and it was a young student from the University of, and said that they had been in Maine the previous weekend with some friends, and they would never forget what happened. And essentially it was the young girl, her sister, who had a big believer in reincarnation and all this sort of thing, said, "Stop the car, that's my house." And they couldn't stop her. She ran up to the door, pounded on the door, and a couple answered the door, and the woman screamed when she saw the girl. The man couldn't speak, and finally everybody had the creeps by now, and the girl who had knocked on the door said, "I'm sorry to bother you, I just feel as though I know this house." And the man said, "Well, you should know this house, you haunt it." So I so anyway, I got into that, and as luck would have it, my mother's family had a house vacation home in that town on the Maine coast for since 1872. So we knew a few people in town. And I managed to get to the bottom of that, but it just further confused me. It didn't match the generally accepted assumptions.
Let me ask some questions about that, because that's really interesting. I've had ghosts come to my house. My house was an 1840s farmhouse in Pennsylvania. And as a child, I was accustomed to seeing somebody, floating around my rooms. And lots of times they'd stand at the foot of my bed. But at one point, I got very confused because my cousin, who was about a year younger than me, and she lived in a house 4 doors away, I woke up and it was like the sun was rising, so you could see, right? It was day, and there she was standing at the foot of my bed. And I said, I must be crazy because she can't be a ghost. She's still alive. So now you're saying, and I've never heard anybody say this before, you're saying that this young girl went to the house and the woman screamed because she was haunting it. Did you ever get into anything further, any explanation from the couple or from the girl about what might have been going on? Oh,
yeah. Well, I interviewed. I went to. Well, first of all, I didn't dare call the guy. I figured he'd have a heart attack. So I wrote a letter to him, and I put in every psychology, professor, everybody, every priest everybody I'd worked with, just to let him know that I wasn't some kind of flake. I said I'd really like to talk to you about this. And in the meantime, I sent the girl by means of a priest friend of mine who was also a psychologist to the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut, which still exists, for the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory Test. And that's a pre-diagnostic tool that's still used to determine whether someone needs any kind of psychiatric treatment. And so while that was happening, I went up to Maine and I sat down with this couple because the man called me as soon as he received the letter 3 days later. And here's the story I got from the couple. They said they had seen this girl in transparent form coming down the stairs, looking out the front window, doing this, that, and the other thing. But she was in transparent, and she didn't see, she seemed to almost to know they were there, but to really kind of look through them, that sort of thing, which I found very strange. Meanwhile, the girl, I debriefed her, and she said that and they had not talked further, according to the witnesses, than what I've said on the porch. They immediately left as soon as they heard this. You haunt it. See you later, So the girl said that she had dreams, vivid dreams, of doing exactly what the couple had described her doing in transparent form, although not at the same time they were seeing her, which I found very interesting. But coming down the stairs, looking out the front window. And interestingly, in the dreams, she was a mother of 2 children, and it was her house. And she said, as a matter of fact, coming around the corner, and this was in the town of York Harbor, Maine, although in the backcountry, she said the first thing that popped into her mind was, why aren't there any toys in the yard? Apparently their kids had toys all over the yard. So, I kind of left that. I was kind of dazzled by the thing. But looking back on it now, if I knew then what I think I know now, they were experiencing a joint experience, a mutual experience of the same parallel worlds, because the only explanation for this stuff, and again, I always say I could be wrong, the old ideas, the old spiritualist ideas might be correct, maybe these really are dead people, but I doubt it, because I've never seen it in almost 50 years of working with this stuff. And I think if you sort of open the doors and get out of the box, whatever, all kinds of amazing things happen, and there are all sorts of different conclusions that can be reached. But I think that what I started at this point to run into quantum mechanics. Now, there's been a lot of baloney about that out there, but at this point today, physicists pretty much can't deny the existence of parallel worlds. Okay, what does that mean? You have string theory, which postulates, maybe 11 or more parallel worlds. Okay, in physics and many sciences, particularly physics, they will come up with a theory to explain something they don't understand and kind of hope that it proves out. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to do it, because very often it does. The whole theory of dark matter and all that resulted from such a theory, and a stopgap sort of thing. So the idea with the multiple worlds is that, and because string theory is supposed to unite old-time Newtonian physics that will build you a highway or get you to the moon, with the new fringe physics, the quantum physics, which will perhaps define and deepen our understanding of reality. So it's supposed to bring all that together. And maybe it will, I don't know. But the quantum idea is that you have the idea that we go on and that is accepted by some big names who've been on our show, such as Dr. Amit Goswami and Dr. Fred Alan Wolf, legends in the community there, is that every first of all, based on Einstein's 1952 theory of relativity, there is no past, there is no future. Everything is simultaneous. We just experience it as a function of our consciousness from past to future. Which this does all kinds of wonders for the old ideas about reincarnation and all that. But be that as it may, the idea of time is not only simultaneous, but also all things that are possible do actually exist in concrete reality somewhere or someone in the multiverse. You don't call it the universe because there are all sorts of different, the multiverse. And in many, many different worlds, which have different laws of physics, you can have different things happening. In other words, you, Janet, were never born in many parallel worlds. Sasha, you died in a UFO crash 30,000 years ago. It's all out there somewhere or somewhen. The theory of physics of consciousness based on this, something I happen to subscribe to, is that our entire subconscious is made up of these parallel worlds that we're living. And in the a given parallel world, the world which we're conscious of now is part of your subconscious. That explains why not only a lot of the paranormal stuff I was running into, but explains why Mozart, at the age of 4, started composing brilliant piano concerti and could perform before the crowned heads of Europe and the Pope flawlessly as a young child, because he already is, you can't even use the term was anymore, is a brilliant composer in many parallel worlds. And he was just aware of it and in contact with it. This is wild stuff. And it's hard to get your head around, especially the time thing. But it's the only thing that explained what was going on. If I have a moment, I will explain one thing that occurred, and this is in my next book that's coming out in August. I call it the Mistaken Medium. And there's a lot of background to this, but I was working while a seminary student in upstate New York. Yeah, I was working with a priest. And the faculty at that particular seminary, Wadhams Hall Seminary, was very sympathetic to my paranormal work, something that surprised me very much, because the Bishop of Burlington, Vermont, my boss, had sent me there to kind of keep me out of mischief. Well, he didn't figure on Father Lawrence and the St. Lawrence State Hospital, or otherwise known as the Asylum for the Insane. So I was working with him there, and there was pastoral work the seminarians would do as part of their training, go visit patients and that sort of thing, and have pray with them and all this. But I was working with him on exorcisms. Okay, very, very hush hush, obviously. But at one point there was we were going to deal. I was curious about the haunted ward, as I called it. For about a year, there had been a ward in which there was, the staff didn't like to be there at night. The patients were antsy most of the time. And I ran into a woman there who claimed to be a psychic medium. And she said, "Oh, do you know why this hallway is haunted?" I said, "Well, no." And she said, "Well, there's a man who is waiting for his wife, who presumably was a patient there, and he's going to take her home after she passes over." So I said, "Oh, all right." And because this is 1973, and I'd already been very confused by this idea. And I said, maybe that's not good enough. Maybe there's more to it. So that was her interpretation. I said, I'm going to see what I can do with this. There was in that hallway a little chapel. It was really not used, very small room, like one light bulb and a skylight. And I went in there and kind of on the slide. And the staff figured, well, he's a seminarian, he's going to the chapel. So it took the better part of several hours over 3 nights. And I just put myself in a meditative state. And I've always hesitated to write about this because I always advise against mediumistic activities, because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what these things are. It's to believe what they're saying can be a highly reckless and dangerous thing to do. So here I am doing it, right? I don't consider it mediumistic. I just put myself in a meditative state. Maybe I'm fooling myself. Anyway, all of a sudden I heard right in my left ear, "Hello." Not hello, hello. And I started this conversation. I was really shocked. I wasn't as frightened as I thought I would be. But that this was a man waiting for his wife. And I said, oh, gee, maybe she's right. But it turned out he was waiting for his wife at the railroad station across the St. Lawrence River in Prescott, Ontario, Canada. So I'm there, what? And the word order he used was very odd. He couldn't understand some of my words, but it was very clear that he was waiting. And I even heard sounds in the background. Now, there really was a railroad station across the river. I'd gone to Montreal many times from that station, except that this guy seemed to be in a parallel reality. And the first thing I thought was, the river's a mile wide here. How can I hear you? But he knew about Ogdensburg, the town we were in, and this. So, long story short, it's this. If it's what it appeared to be, the guy was waiting for his wife, and if his, across the membrane or brain, BRANE, as a physicist would call it, between parallel worlds, which is plasma charged and highly electrical, which is why you look through it and you see people who look shimmery and ghost-like and all that. She picked it up maybe, and what else could it be but a spirit, a ghost waiting for his wife, because she had no other concept of what it could be. So if this is what it appeared to be, it was a whole kind of new approach to what this was. And I actually heard a diesel locomotive in the background. So I was freaked out. I went back to the seminary and I didn't eat. They got worried about me. I pretended to be sick. I didn't know what to do. Because I'll tell you, Janet and Sasha, people ask me, what are the scariest things that have happened to me over all these years? And the phenomena are one thing, but the really scary things are when your belief system gets shattered.
Right. By
things, that happened a year later in the Bridgeport poltergeist case I was working on with the Warrens. That happened again. And
before we go to the next case, let me just stop with this one here, because this is very, very interesting. Did you ever get the man's name? And did you ever try to, was he in the same time, or was it a future past time?
This is the thing. He said his name was Gilbert. Normal enough name, all right? Mm-hmm. But the time seemed to be all messed up. Like it would all of a sudden, the connection would stop. And I'd come back the next day, and I'd pick him up again. It might take half an hour to 45 minutes to do it in the meditative state, but I'd pick him up again. And to him, there had been no break in the conversation. So, so there was a time issue going on. Spatially, it was very strange. There was another case several cases actually, where whoever I was talking to seemed to be up by the ceiling. There have been many cases in which I could not communicate because I didn't know the language, or that whatever I was talking to was totally nonverbal. There was I called the Noble Bear in the 1980s. This is in the area of Buffalo, New York, and not far from Niagara Falls. And this was the people had it was this through an erstwhile seminary classmate of mine. They had heard something stomping around in their attic, and they thought it was a ghost, and they were afraid, or it had to be the this or that guy who died in the house, or those are the assumptions. You walk into these cases and they tell you what's going on, and I find that's usually not correct. And this Noble Bear, as I call it, was I did the same thing with the meditation, and I actually got a photograph of this one. It's going to be in the book. And the spatial relationship was very odd. It was like this very tall creature who, I can't stress how much of the nobility, goodness, even wisdom pouring off this being. It was it was a beautiful experience. But he said that he was speaking in a very odd form of Latin. The case endings were all wrong, but I picked it out just from knowing vocabulary. And he had no idea he was in any kind of attic in Tonawanda, New York, or Buffalo. And he was on a quest sent by a female supreme being to go to Renthusia, a place I have never heard of before or since, and to perform acts of caritas et humilita, which is essentially charity and love and humility. Imagine being in a world where you're rewarded for humility. I mean,
wow.
You talk about alien. I mean, it's like it's. It was funny. Our producer's just saying he's from Tonawanda. What a riot! What a yeah. But after a few days of these communications, and you try to explain this to the people you're trying to help. They don't get any of this. I didn't get it. So off he went. They never had any more issues. And
so he wasn't even Terran. He was extraterrestrial.
Well, I don't know. What does that even mean, Janet? It's kind of.
I guess just origins of where do you originate from? Which sphere of influence do you? But we're multidimensional beings, and we're everywhere. So
he wasn't from Tonawanda as we know it. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
He was passing through. According to him, if I got the Latin right, he was on a road in a woodland talking to alii viatori, people, fellow travelers, if you will, along the road. So I mean, you tell me. I mean,
but you described him as a bear. On the bear. Go ahead, Sasha. What do you have? Comments, questions. Go ahead.
Well, just it's interesting. It's like two parts of yourself are meeting and finding how you cohere.
Well, actually, you may have hit the nail right on the head there in a way, because one of the principles, again, if this theory is correct about the multiverse, is that we exist in many of these parallel worlds, and not just that, but that we are each other in one world or another, including what we call the parasites and maybe the noble bear, ursine creatures or whatever. And that was kind of brought home in a very simple way to me. Again, if it's true. I was speaking at Mount Ida College up near Boston. This is many years ago. And it was I got a kick out of it because half the students were studying to be undertakers, right? I was one of the majors offered there. And huge crowd. And I'd been talking about human relationships in the multiverse. And I love to speak at colleges because I get great questions from the students. And at the end, they'll usually put me in a big armchair, like Santa Claus or something. And the students will come up and in pairs or in groups and tell me their stories. There were two freshman girls who were among the first to come up, and they said, we're very intrigued by this because on registration day, we saw each other across the crowded room and we'd never seen each other before. We were sisters from the start, just inseparable friends now and this sort of thing. And so, why do you think that was? I said, well, at one point in the multiverse, in one world or another, or many, you are each other. I didn't have to say another word. They recognized that concept. They said, that's it. And they went scurrying happily away, figuring that they had an explanation for, how these things happen. We've all run into people we feel an immediate connection with, and, maybe that's the explanation. Maybe it's something else. But I think that's rather beautiful. However, where it gets really complicated is when you start dealing with parasites and these sorts of things. But before... I don't know if you want to stay on the subject of the cross-world relationships.
This a little bit more, and then we'll go to parasites. So let's
yeah. The funny thing
these... Go ahead.
Well, no, I just started running into quote-unquote ghosts who were terrified of us because they thought we were ghosts haunting them. And it's funny, I was on the air a few years ago with none other than Jason Hawes of the Ghost Hunters. And he was doing a show... And he said, it's funny you describe it that way because they were talking about this is in one of their shows. I don't watch these shows. I don't know. Better things to do. I mean, with all due respect to the work they put in. At some kind of haunted hotel, and they were in touch with this woman, and she kept the woman who was supposed to be a ghost, and kept asking if they were from security. And he said, they've run into that kind of thing where the ghost doesn't react as you'd expect them to. And maybe thinks you're something other than you are. But I've run into this time and time again where the ghost is afraid of us because we think they're haunting them. We had a case in Connecticut, and we spend years on cases. There's one in Connecticut we've been working on for 13 years, and it keeps getting bigger because it's a flap area, as we call it. I mean, if you want to get into that too, we can do that. But it's just... these things are not what they appear to be, at least in our experience.
So what's a flap area?
Well, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I should have explained. That's an area of recurrent paranormal activity of over a wide area of many different kinds that are traditionally not related to each other. In other words, you have lots of ghost activity, you have UFOs, you have Bigfoot or other cryptids, other things of this kind, public changes in behavior, things of that type. Of course, the mother of all these flap areas, you might say, is the Ohio Valley, where the Mothman incidents occurred in the 1960s. I'm sure everybody who's listening probably knows what that is, but just in case, in 1966, November 66, there was began to be sightings of this, what the press later called Mothman, a huge, actually was a rather muscular human-like figure with bat-like wings. The first encounter by the two couples, the Scarberrys and the Millettes, which is well documented in the literature, is often not well known. They thought that they saw this creature following their car and all this, but what they really saw was this creature with its wings stuck in like a fence along the road, and it turned up in their headlights, and it seemed to be terrified of them, and it got free and ran. If I had wings, I'd fly if I was terrified, but ran into the area, the TNT area, one of the buildings, and this sort of thing. And this thus began, and it was reported to have followed them at up to 100 miles an hour, flying over their car. And the police even found damage to the doors on each side of the car, where they said the wings had hit as it flew. And hundreds of people ended up seeing this. It was seen before this in another part of West Virginia, and this sort of thing about 80 miles away. But this, of course, was well documented, and John Keel came to the fore, a journalist from New York who came down and investigated all this stuff, Men in Black. But what you often don't hear, and we heard this from witnesses ourselves when Ben and I were there in 2003, that there were many other things that occurred along with this Mothman sighting. Nightly UFOs. People would go out to a certain area near the TNT area, so-called because it had been ordnance manufactured during World War II and was now derelict. And they'd see these strange lights in the sky, which would sometimes respond to lights from the ground. There were the Men in Black, so-called. There was an increase in psychic abilities among many people. There were red eyes looking in windows, people hearing footsteps on their roofs. There was poltergeist activity. You pretty much name it, and this is going on. So what a flap area, this is a flap area. And the term flap is used often in connection with UFOs, lots and lots of UFOs being seen. Mm-hmm. But we find that the flap area, the one in Connecticut that we call the Litchfield Triangle, now includes about 320 square miles, reaching over into the Hudson Valley of New York. And it's an arbitrary, I think, distinction, because how do you know where this area begins and where it ends, and what phenomena are related to what? But you have to start somewhere as a research tool. So we have a lot of questions. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to interject. So I think I grew up in a flap area because I was in Pittsburgh, which a town called Avalon, which was heading north on the Ohio, so heading towards where Mothman territory. So in 66, we had a sighting of the Mothman, but we weren't aware of the Mothman. Mm-hmm. We were just kids out on the, we have a local swimming pool and park, and we were all hanging around the park, and suddenly, and now I didn't personally see it, but I was there when everybody was running around and chasing it. Like, did you see it? Did you see it? And it just went up to the north side of the park. And so we would run up there. We're running around like crazy. And finally the local newspaper came down with the press, and they took all our pictures. And then apparently it was seen just flying away. So that's just some verification. But years later, I thought I had made it all up. It's like, no, there was no flying being with the, and then the book came out, the movie came out. They go, oh, thanks. But, have you ever heard of the Pittsburgh tri-state area being a flap area? Because I would see UFOs all over the place in my childhood, of different configurations, large orbs and cigar-shaped craft, and traditional escape. What do you know about the tri-state area, Pittsburgh, West Virginia, and Ohio?
Well, don't look now,
that little corner.
Yeah, but that is our biggest case right now. As
Really?
luck would have it. Yes, we're headed out there again in May. We've been working, but it's a new case. We've only been working on it since 2016, and we have this is centered in the Du Bois area. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
All right, and it's kind of fanning out from there. We have it's a really long story, but we have neighborhood meetings there at least once a year, and we have up to 35 people who show up at these things, and every one of them has had Bigfoot sightings and strange lights in proximity as well. I myself saw Bigfoot there on September 16th, 2016, and you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was looking for something entirely different. In May of 16, our first trip, and Ben wasn't able to come, but Shane Searway, somebody you ought to have on your show. Shane is from New Hampshire, and he's
say it again.
Shane Searway. Shane Searway, trueghost.com. And he's one of the most feet-on-the-ground investigators I've ever worked with, one of the few I will work with. And he's also got experience as a Blackfoot shaman, which is a very good combination. Good researcher and that kind of spiritual background. In May, he had a Bigfoot sighting in broad daylight, and then I had another one, of course, that same year in September. And we had obtained a number of photos of strange lights in the sky and a lovely field there at the sort of the top of the immediate track that we were beginning with. And I was looking for that. I had my camera set up for that. And all of a sudden I looked to the right, and there was, in the brilliant moonlight of that Friday evening, a huge, hairy figure. I remember the huge legs and knees moving up and down as it walked very slowly. Its head was bowed as if looking for something in the grass, tall grass. I was very surprised at my own reaction. Now, before I wonder if paranormal phenomena, maybe we respond to them according to what we bring to them. In other words, whenever I go to an area like this, I always put myself in a meditative state, express respect for the powers of nature that are there, and I go in with that very positive and open attitude. And maybe that's why I felt privileged. I did not feel threatened at all. This is about 200 feet away. And the only problem was that in the middle of the sighting, my wife called. Now, gee, Paul, why didn't you turn off the phone? But I was a little new to this Bigfoot stuff, so I got out of my truck, and I took a picture through that window was closed, and it was cold that night, so obviously the infrared camera, there's no signature, so I didn't get anything. And I get out very slowly, and all of a sudden my ringtone, the theme from Lord of the Rings, goes blasting out over this field, and I said, actually, the thing's gone. I said, I'm in the middle of a Bigfoot sighting. I said, what? He was going to call me in the middle of a field in the middle of the night, so it was her. Closest I ever came to divorce. So in any case, that was not the end of it. A few minutes later, some lights appeared in a tree on the other side of the field, and they didn't look like UFOs or anything weird. It looked like somebody was on the ground with a spotlight. So I didn't want to go taking off across the field. I don't know if there's some yawning chasm was going to swallow my truck or what. So the next night we had our actually the next morning, Shane and I went out, and we sort of reenacted the whole thing. And we found a long trail from the woods up to the middle of the field of some large creature on two legs. And then it just disappeared. Apparently it turned around and went back or whatever, apparently when my wife called. So we did document that. But that night at the neighborhood meeting, I described this experience, and a hand went up. And it was a woman named Melissa. And she said that was she and her son with the lights. These people are used to this. Said she came home with her son. They heard something huge moving through that field while I was seeing it, and came up with their lights to see if everything was, of course, it was gone by then. So that, if that's what it appears to be, it's corroborative evidence that maybe I did see something there. So that's only the beginning on that case, and we're going to be back with a team. We have an informal. We don't have any organization. We have an informal team that includes Shane, of course, obviously Ben, and Mark D'Antonio, who is well known from MUFON circles. He's on TV a lot, and Chuck Credo from Maine, who does the Galileo interviews. Brilliant interviewer, and also Alexander Petikoff, who many of these people will be speaking at the event in
yes,
Filer's event.
Dr.
Yeah,
Alexander.
Warwick, yeah. And again, these are all great people to have on your show. Also, Laurie Greer, a producer for our show and a behavioral scientist who is very good with the witnesses. So it's a good rounded out group. It's not formal, and I think we're going toward an interesting TV production here.
Sounds great. Now, did you receive any kind of telepathic impressions or communication from Bigfoot when he was in your proximity?
No, I did. It was just a feeling of complete peace. That's all I can, and just peace.
Was that coming from yourself, or because a lot of the Greys will send you peace and relax and chill. Do you think that might be something coming from the Bigfoot that you wouldn't have a negative reaction to his presence?
That's perhaps true, but Janet, what it reminded me of were similar feelings to what I had in this Noble Bear thing so many years before. It wasn't the same, but it was similar. There was a sense of goodness, but just in contrast to this, a little girl, 12 years old, was on the road just below this site, had a Bigfoot sighting. Not at the same time. This is about a year later, and was utterly terrified by it. To this day, she won't talk to us. She has come to one or two of the neighborhood meetings, but usually ends up crying, and her parents have to take her out. And I hope by the time she grows up, she'll talk to us, because you get these, these weird guys from New England with beards, and maybe that's it. I don't know, but she just. That's. I'm struck by the contrast that some people have positive sightings. Some people have very bad encounters. Just to go back to Mothman for a moment, I think of Andy Colvin, who's a writer on this subject, and others. One other we encountered in West Virginia, in Point Pleasant, in Parkersburg, I should say, in 2003, who said they had very positive experiences with Mothman. So again, the same thing. You wonder if what you bring to it was what you take away from it. This Andy himself claims that when he and his family had a sighting, all of a sudden his math improved by 10 power of 10. He became and this sort of thing, and he credits Mothman with that. Another person we spoke with there, similar thing. He had a very positive experience, and he believes that his health improved because of his encounter with Mothman, who is generally considered to be really, really scary and evil. Maybe not. Maybe it's what we bring to it. So again,
let's look at that for just a moment. I want to break that down, because that's a very interesting concept. Because we had this whole paranormal phenomenon from encounters with Mothman and Bigfoot all the way up to abductions, and that some people call it abduction, some people call it contact, and some people call it experiencer. So even people, what they tend to label their experiences. So that is a good question. I'm going to bring Dr. Lessin into this as well. What part of it is the person and what they're bringing to the table? What part of it is we've uncovered with the Greys? They sometimes the person starts with a negative experience and they show their big eyes, or they touch them, or they do something, and next thing you know, they're peaceful and calm. Is it some kind of coming from the direction of the encounter, the being, or the whatever you're encountering, maybe as a protection mechanism? It calms you down into a calm state, and then what is yourself? And let me ask Sasha that. Go ahead, Sasha. What would you like to say about what we're talking about so far?
Well, one thing is you needn't come from polarity. You can just start with the idea that the fractal of all that is within you, and those fractals which become salient to you indicate that it's time for you to really understand what it is that's being signaled. What parts of what seems to be you and not you are ready to recognize themselves and transcend. So it's wonderful, and same with anything that comes to your. So imagine, if you would, a parallel universe, another life, another space, or simultaneous with the one you had now, one that was just had a lesson for you that was so cool. And just imagine you go there and get a sense of that place, and if that place that you're imagining, whatever imagining is, that you that the place that you go to what could speak to you? What is the essence of what it would communicate? And just think about that for a little while, and you'll get a taste. This is all there for all of us. Just pay attention to what's within, and the gestalt that emerges will be perfect for your evolution and that of the universe, I hope.
Right. So, yeah, it's kind of like the law of attraction and action. So back to you, Paul. So you're having these experiences, people having varied experiences. What level does that even? How are you pulling those experiences in for your greater experience as a humanoid being? Having an existence. What do you think about all that? Yeah.
Well, again, I think Sasha has really expressed it well. We have to get to know each other better, Sasha. I might bring in the term quantum entanglement, but it's all their terms are terms, and the experience is the same, I think. This gets into I don't know. I have trouble talking about these exorcisms I did, but everything from that to the two girls at Mount Ida College. The island theory, I think, is really what when I started to try and move beyond the old ideas, I had to start to reject what I call the island theory, that all of us and everything about us is contained within our bodies, within our brains, and which is why physical science will reject, or at least be very skeptical about, the idea of ESP, extrasensory perception, the old term that my old friend Loiza Ryan used to. Are we taking a break?
No.
Oh, okay. That's weird noises.
Not yet. I know. It's
okay.
Through my phone.
Well, just stop me when we do.
Yes, I will.
But I think that, again, sharing identities and a sort of a completely unified picture is what we're dealing with. In the exorcism case, I'm thinking particularly it was a young girl named Barbara in 1973, and I was still wet behind the ears with this stuff. I just got the impression that this thing, first of all, was not what the theology said it was. It was using that against us, I think. But she had bonded with this parasite that folklore would call a demon, and that they fulfilled that role. And I think that looking back on it, what had happened was that the parasite had found the point in the multiverse where he, and it was a male force, was Barbara. And Barbara responded to that because of the shared identity. And this is wild stuff, but I think it is kind of up the alley of what Sasha was saying in a sense, but there's nothing positive about it. But there are plenty of positive things too that happen. That's why I ask people at times when they're so terrified in a parasite case, and the parasites do come in, and they will feed upon your energy, and you end up with chronic fatigue syndrome and all this. But I tell them to call upon their ancestors, who again, time all being simultaneous, are not dead. Nobody's dead. The only thing that's not possible in the multiverse is death, and they will sometimes respond if they're in worlds where the laws of physics are such that they are aware of us, such as Gilbert was of me in Ontario, and whatever world he was in that time in '73, that was. I think that's essentially what it is. I think it's really quite simple and quite elegant, and it gets into very interesting ideas about what we really are. So I think that
this is so. Beyond all that, you're modeling each person's inner exorcist. So they walk away from the experience with you, inside of them, the ability to exorcise parasites.
Well, essentially, yeah, people have to, and I'm sure you've run into this a million times, Sasha. People who are maybe our vintage, they're having a problem. They want you to come in and fix it, And I'll go in and say, and Shane will say, or Ben will say, you have to fix it, in other words, so how long has this been going on? Well, 4 years. Well, what changed in your life 4 years ago that perhaps is feeding this, or there's bringing on something negative like this? Because really, I think in the sense, particularly of parasites, it's not places that are haunted, it's people,
Yeah.
And that's a whole different subject. But Yeah, I mean, I think people really do have to take the bull by the horns, and ultimately we're responsible for making our own bed in the multiverse and in our own lives in whatever world we're in, whether it comes to the paranormal or not. Personal responsibility is everywhere.
Right.
It's really interesting. Just in terms of personal usage, I can talk to my father or my teacher, Angelus Arian, people that have passed over, and I hear their voices and their wisdom comes to me so clearly, and it doesn't matter what the ontological status of the experience is. I feel uplifted and learned, and it feels groovy.
Yeah, boy, you must be my age.
Oh yeah.
No, it's I get that. Although I tend to be very skeptical, particularly when I was having these experiences with contact with these. Is this really what it says it is? But when you have an overwhelming conviction that it's a sincere experience and what you're talking to really is what it says it is, then, and again, I always warn against this, which is why I've been hesitant to write about it until now. But you know how it is, Alex. When you get to a certain age, you realize if you don't tell the story now, you never know if you're going to be able to. So,
right.
There you go.
So we do therapy with people, and we've dealt with exorcisms and attachments and demons, and people can go everywhere we can tarry with them. And so it's very interesting that you dealt with it because of your training. But and that's our break. We'll be back in 5 minutes. See you in 5.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
You need some more than speed records in this day and age. You need coverage.
Coverage? Oh, you mean them little root weevils that crawl around popping off cameras in your face?
Those root weevils write history.
Many of you know that quote by Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, "You can't handle the truth." Well, you can, and Event Horizons will give you those truths. So when you're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore from that memorable CNN network, you'll know just what to do. We will draw you in and become your news addiction at Event Horizons. Join us Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time at freedomslips.com. Revolution Radio. Our world team members are Dennis Fetcho, John Ilias, David Dunger, Hyla Cass, MD, Melanie Bridgeton, Jim Mars, Paula Harris, John Trallo, Maria Payan, Christopher Husser, DODDS, Jonathan Orchard, and me, your anchor, Dr. Robin Falco.
If you decide not to volunteer, it will not be held against you in any way.
Sounds dangerous.
It is. Very dangerous.
Count me in.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
In breaking news, a visiting Syrian diplomat reported today that their population is evolving rapidly and advancing into a 5th-dimensional consciousness. They are seeking peace with all cosmic cultures, which may mean that the Earth will be asked to join the prestigious Galactic Federation of Light Alliances. Please join Debbie West and Michael Hathaway on Lost Knowledge, Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, for the latest breaking news on the Star Visitors' peaceful contact and the ongoing project of cleansing the Earth.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
How healthy are your arteries? Deteriorating circulation has a number of early warning signs. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, fingers and or toes often go cold, arms and or legs often go to sleep, sharp diagonal crease in the earlobe, short walks cause cramping or pains in legs, memory is not as good as it used to be, ankles swell late in the day, chest pain after physical exercise or emotional stress. If you experience even one of these symptoms, your circulatory system is crying out for attention. Extendivite is a natural solution to help improve your overall health. Extendivite is not your average heart tonic. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com or find us on Amazon.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at revolution.radio. And I'm your host, Janet Kara Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin, producer Thomas Becker, and our guest today is Paul Eno. And I wanted to mention to everybody to please go over to that donation button on revolution.radio and do make your donation this week, because we really appreciate your donation, and that's what helps keeps us all on the air here. And the Mad Painter, Thomas Becker, how are we doing on our fundraising? What's our goal, and how far do we have to go?
We need $25.50, and we got $20.89. That leaves $461, and we still have that special for $160 in the continental U.S. We'll send you 5-ounce silver bar, and remember to put your name in there, or we'll keep the money and the silver.
Can they get it if they're outside of the continental U.S.?
I believe you'd have to get a hold of Hawk, but I think it's just add an extra $10 to it for shipping.
For shipping. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. So I want to get back to the 1973 exorcism that Paul was beginning to discuss before we came upon our commercial break. Dr. Lessin, do you have anything to add or any direction you want to go in the next hour of the show?
Yes, indeed. Basically, basically we have a model, Paul, with you as our hero, of how to break, to expand, take what's good in the Matrix, and yet transcend it and be able to access all the possibilities and see which ones are most salient for you and the whole rest of the ball of wax. So I look forward to exploring your model because it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I wanted to add before I go back to you, Paul, I'm watching a show called the OA, and it's exactly what you're talking about, the multidimensional nature of existence, and in the show these characters die and they just immediately go on to another form.
Really?
Like they're yeah, I recommended it.
Never heard of it.
It's on the second season. It's OA. It's a very strange show, but it's very progressive, and yeah, I've been looking for what's really going on, because like you, I've had this whole life full of paranormal phenomenon. So you're making a lot of sense for me. So
good. Yeah, I hope so. And what is that, Netflix or something?
It's on Netflix. It's OA.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check that out. Thank you. Okay.
And of course they get the government in it, and the government knows about all this and that type of thing. But very interesting. It's a mystery within a mystery within a mystery. So, so you were talking about, I don't know if I left off at the right spot, but it's something about the exorcisms, and I think you had some more to contribute what you were talking about, the exorcisms.
Well, yeah, I know. I should emphasize I was not performing these. I was just assisting a priest, so I witnessed that. I didn't really do anything except that. But it was very interesting. The first one, and again, this is October of '73, the first one I was invited to. And, of course, we sort of did this mating dance, Father Lawrence and myself, because we hadn't known each other previously, but word got to him that I had been working with Ed and Lorraine Warren for about a year, and he knew I was interested in the subject. So he lived at the seminary, although he didn't teach. And I'd see him in the the hallway, and I said, who's this guy? So I found out after he called me to his room, and it turned out he was the diocesan exorcist. Now this is Again, all very hush-hush, but every diocese or regional division of the church headed by a bishop it has or is supposed to have someone who's trained in the paranormal, or at least their very narrow interpretation of it, and will approach exorcism, if necessary, before, while this, if it comes up, which it usually does. So we had a number of meetings, and he said, "Have you ever assisted at an exorcism?" I said, "Well, Ed Warren has told me about it and probably some recordings, but I've never actually done it." So off I went with him to the St. Lawrence State Hospital, where he was the Catholic chaplain, and that was the scene, the background of what was going on. So this barber was 17 years old. There would be things, her drawers would open at night in her room and stuff would fly out. Something would pull covers off her bed. There'd be strange sounds, pounding on the outside window and the wall of the second floor room. And finally, they got her. The other patients who she was sharing the room with, there were three others. They put her in a private room, and there were a number of things that you look for in this case. And so, in her case, when the things are happening outside the control of the patient. In other words, if they're schizophrenic and they're hearing voices, that's one thing. But if stuff's flying off shelves on the other side of the room, obviously no psychiatric condition is going to explain that happening in the normal sense. Things happening again outside. So that was going on. And so push came to shove, and Father Lawrence decided that she needed to be exorcised. Now, in the Roman Catholic tradition, that is very formal and institutionalized. He had to get permission of the bishop, convince Bishop, who at the time was Stanislaus Brżana, native of Poland, Bishop of Augsburg, that these things had to, this had to be done. And the bishop usually, knew him very well and agreed. Because of her age, her mother had to sign for this. Of course, the mother was an alcoholic and not in very much better shape than Barbara was. And the child had been abused and everything else. There were all sorts of things that go with this that are very unpleasant. It was a drug addiction, this sort of thing. And I can't emphasize this enough, every medical and psychiatric avenue must be exhausted before deciding on anything paranormal or any sort of exorcism being needed. This was all done in her case. So we arrived at 3 days in a row we did this, but the exorcism prayer itself in the Roman ritual is very complicated. There is one point at which the demon, quote unquote, is commanded to say its name. Okay. And I thought, why do they do this? And why would they believe what it says? Okay. Now the girl had said that its name was Chal. Chall is how we rendered it. And but I said to Father, how can you believe these things? He said, well, they're compelled by the power of Christ, the authority of Christ to not to lie. So I'm all right. Because twice in the Gospels, at two places, Jesus commands the thing to give its name, and then legion in the case of the Gadarene demoniac and all this. These things there are biblical precedents for it, which is why they do it. There are a number of litanies that occur. These are naming various saints. This is done at several services, and there are 3 actual exorcism prayers where the priest commands the quote-unquote demon to come out of the person. All right. My first impressions and I had not yet learned to pay attention to my gut instincts here. Something was wrong. I got the impression by the time this was over that this was a parasitical entity, and I really hadn't developed that concept yet, and that it was using us. The nature of the Roman Catholic ritual is to command, to express authority. Everybody, people are told to remain calm, but you can't help but kind of get a little excited. And this thing, was feeding on this, in my opinion, to the point where during the third exorcism prayer that we did on the third day, and this was very quick. I guess Father Lawrence was very good at this because exorcisms have been known to take weeks, even months. Okay, and during the command to say its name, a voice came out of her that was vaguely female, although the thing felt male to me, and said, "Chow," in a very weird voice that I would not want to hear again. I didn't say anything. I was standing on the side of her. There was a guy named Leonard who was another attendant, and we had to hold her down. She kept floating out of the wheelchair, and we had to push her down. And finally, the third time, she was tied. And at this one point, it said, it said, "Chow." I said, in my mind, not out loud, "Yeah, right." And because I didn't believe it. It comes out with the same voice and said in a language that we later found out was Malay, like from Asia, Malaysia. The doctor had to look it up, but he was recording this. So that's how he got it. And it was directed at me. They didn't want to tell me when they finally translated it what it said. Right before my graduation the following year in 74, I should say it was in 75. May of 75, Father Lawrence sat me down and we had a very prayerful conversation, and he said, "I don't feel right not telling you what this thing said." And it was a reference to my father's suicide. You can imagine this is difficult to talk about, as if the thing were there. And it hit. I became all cold all over, and I thought he was going to advise me to get out of this. But he had confidence in me, and maybe he thought I would be ordained someday and be an exorcist in some diocese someplace. And he said, "If you're going to stay with this ministry, you have to get used to this sort of thing, and you have to deal with it." So it was just like I was like frozen right on the spot, because this alien thing, and I can think of no better word to describe these things than alien. Their presence is dirty, different, absolutely other. So this alien thing was there when I was 7 years old, standing over the body of my father. I mean, what was going on here? Wow. And I still don't necessarily believe that that's what happened, but again, because of, as Sasha and I have been talking about, the sort of the unity with a capital U across the whole biosphere and across the whole multiverse, there was awareness, and these parasites are very good at picking up where they are in parallel worlds where they really were there, so to speak. So I carried on from there. It again was, I think, in a way, kind of confirmed the belief that the exorcism process aids the parasite rather than what the ritual calls the sick person, because within 3 years, Barbara had died of a drug overdose. She did seem to get better initially, but I heard later on that he had to go back. There were 7 different people of various ages who were exorcised by our little team there, and Father Lawrence had to go back and do some others again. And I just think these things are not what they appear to be, and this ritual does not always do what it says what's advertised, And I think, again, it was a deeper picture of the thing, using it to feed upon us and pretending to agree with our theology in order to get us to keep going. And I think that's essentially how they eat, because they're living creatures. I mean, in the Bridgeport case of 1974, I was in this house. The Warrens weren't there. They were out doing some TV show. I was trying to protect this little girl from one of these things. There were 4 entities that we thought were demons, but this thing had a physical body. Because I instinctively pushed against it at one point, I could feel the physical structure. I could feel skeletal structure. It was almost like a bird. That was another moment which was so terrifying, because it shattered my belief system. It then I was disarmed, so to speak, psychologically. It got around me and threw the little girl across the room. And it was just, again, another moment where I saw these old ideas just don't do it. So, again, back to square one. So, I just, again, I was a very annoying questioner in the seminary, and this sort of was the one that sort of took the cake, because these are matters that affected people's lives. And one more interesting thing I'll say before I finish on that subject is that, and I didn't remember this until last year when I was finishing, because this constitutes the first chapter of my book that's coming out in August. And I had to look back through old notes that I had. I worked very hard to bury a lot of these memories. And I hated writing this book. But the old notes that I dug out had something I had totally forgotten, that 5 of the 7 people we were working on with the exorcisms at the state hospital had UFO experiences, and including encounters and possible abductions. Now, I brought this up to Father Lawrence, and he said, well, don't pay any attention to that. And he said, essentially, he said in a very kind way, these people are essentially inmates at a state hospital. They're officially bonkers anyway, so I wouldn't pay attention to any of this stuff. But I wish we had, because it indicated sort of the crossover phenomena that we run into so often today, and very often people of the caliber of Kathy Martin or Denise Stoner will call and say, well, we have a case where abductions are taking place, but there's also poltergeist phenomena. People are having quote unquote demonic activity take place. What are your thoughts on this? So it's becoming more recognized today, but in those days, it really took me by surprise.
Well, it's fascinating. Well, we're noticing the same thing. There's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
When we interview people, like yourself, and a lot of experiencers, contactees, and myself, I've had all the above.
Yeah.
It's beyond random probability. It's like, well, how did I happen to have, abductions, and it was part of the Mothman thing, and it just keeps going on, and I think, well, that's just weird. That can't possibly happen to one person. But then I find out my story is similar to many others. It's like,
very true.
Having all these things going on. And I'm really curious, because you've been doing this research about as long as I have, although mine wasn't as structured. Mine was just like, I'm having these experiences, then I start talking with other people who are willing to talk. Most people will not discuss this until, this recent age, people are starting to get more and more comfortable with it. Or at least they're, it's like, I can't just keep this quiet. I need some answers. So I appreciate your research. I mean, you're really bringing a lot to the table here. And I'm sure when we're done with this interview, we're going to have more questions than we have answers, because it's like opening the Pandora's box and the Russian dolls, right? Nested
pretty much
in each other. Sasha, do you have any comments or questions before we continue? Because this is mind-boggling.
The time is said. The time is said. The walrus said to speak of many things of philosophy and cosmology and how things fit in strings.
Yes. Good. Very true. Good old Lewis Carroll got it right.
Right. So I need more pieces of your puzzle, I guess. So you're going through this, you're writing a book, and you've written some books, but this is going to be focused on this. What is the name of your book? I got to go look that up again. Dancing something on the graves. What is it?
Oh, good heavens. Well, Dancing Past the Graveyard, Poltergeist, yes. Parasites, Parallel Worlds, and God. It's not all about exorcism. It's a lot of different...
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm interested in all the above.
Yes.
So, and because I think that, like you're concluding, there's a connection. There's definitely a connection. And I'm aware of my multidimensional existence simultaneously existing in many realms, planets. I have these vivid dreams, where that's not a dream. I have friends that correlate, and they go, this happened to me too. So we have shared experiences. So if you name it, it's happened to me and to people I know. So what is going on here? Are we in some kind of big experiment of consciousness, or are we creating this ourselves, or are we making it all up as we go along? Will we pop out of this with awareness?
One of the variations of these theories in physics is the holographic theory. And Sasha mentioned the matrix. That's actually a term used in that. And it's... But I think, again, it's two different sides of the same coin when it comes to multiverse and this sort of thing. In the holographic theory, the someone or something is essentially projecting the whole thing on, and it's almost like a computer simulation, all our experiences. That's interesting. But the thing that's really interesting to me is that there is a running theme through all of I think the deeper thinkers in the paranormal about a coming unity, and in theology as well. In the quantum in the holographic theory, The idea is that everything will eventually collapse into a unity. The matrix will eventually collapse into a unity. That theme appears in the multiverse as we approach it. It appears in the theology of Teilhard de Chardin, who was a very forward-thinking and sometimes got in trouble Roman Catholic theologian from the last century, who talked about the eventual not collapse, but gradual unifying everything to the omega point, as he called it. The unifying of all things in the cosmic Christ, whether you're Christian or not, and those are his terms. In our opinion, you have a very, and we've talked to some astronomers about this, possible unification of various worlds and interaction taking place more than has taken place in the past because of the astronomical and electromagnetic environment in the galactic neighborhood, so to speak. And astronomers will tell you this, about every 600 million years, the supergalactic plane will flatten out. And NASA took advantage of that in the solar system by sending out various probes, New Horizons and all this, because all the planets were in line, like you'd see them on a map. Now, when you're a kid in school, they have all the sun, all the planets lined up. Well, that's not how they really are. They're all over the place within their orbits. But now they have been lined up in a plane, and makes them easier to explore, and it also opens up a lot of territory for a lot of strange energies to go blasting around the galactic neighborhood. Rather disconcertingly, the last time this happened, 600 million years ago, you had the Cambrian extinction event, and all of a sudden there were all these new species that came up seemingly out of nowhere. So I don't know if that's going to occur, but in some parallel world where all possibilities exist, it probably is, or already has. So, these are all things we're aware of. But, I think in the book, I use the term unity with a capital U. There is the idea that we're all connected and maybe even coming toward this unity is present really everywhere. In the ancient African idea of Ubuntu, which is simple and brilliant. Everything I do affects you. Everything you do affects me. Everything we do affects the worlds. All right. It's present in Hinduism. It's present, and certainly the Baha'is have it. They don't have a very long tradition, but I think they pretty much get it right. It's present in Christianity. It's present in traditions that go back 30,000 to 150,000 years. In researching the history of the paranormal stuff that we have in a couple of my books, there's the idea that the paranormal has been a tremendous influence on the human psyche and human history. If you look back at the ancient traditions of the Aborigines in Australia, and I actually spent, I was in Australia in the line of duty, and I spent the 7 hours there waiting for extraction, talking to a little guy named Mindalui, who was an Aboriginal elder. And they usually don't talk to outside of it. He said, you have it right. That's what we shamans do. We go into parallel worlds, he said in so many words, and we bring back what's necessary. Everything he described was what a physicist would call collapsing the wave function. So all these wave functions may be collapsing, and this unity may be being built. He said that in the beginning, he told me about the dream time, and that's present in many, many cultures. If you look at the Andaman Islanders and the Nicobar Islanders of the Indian Ocean, with a tradition that goes back at least 50,000 years, you find the same thing. As a matter of fact, in the 1930s, there was several archaeologists who were very shocked to come to the conclusion, and were almost reluctant to publish their findings, that people were not polytheists in the beginning. We assume people were polytheistic worshippers of many gods, and there were demons and all. And as we came forward into the present state of being such geniuses as we are, you get down maybe to one god or whatever. But actually, it seems that people started out as monotheists, worshippers of one god or a god family of a female and a male and maybe a child that was half the time the traditions was us. Then you get a whole different picture that later descended into polytheism and the worship of many gods, and I think this is a sign of a unity that was that broke up and that will eventually come back together again, reflecting everything maybe we've said about stuff breaking up and coming back into union again. And as the worlds join, there are more paranormal experiences, maybe, because that's what paranormal experiences are, experiences of other dimensions, other realms, of other kinds of physical laws, other parallel worlds where other possibilities existed, where a place where your loved one never died, and therefore you see them skipping down the road 2 weeks after their funeral. All these things seem to be happening. Maybe it was always happening, but we're so, we have such an instant communication and information flow today that we just know more about it. But whatever it is, I really think it comes down to the parallel world idea, and the idea that we are learning that we're not just us. We're learning that the paradoxes of the multiverse maybe are the spiritual keys to success. Maybe the idea that the island theory is wrong and that we should forget ourselves in order to find ourselves, embrace humility and therefore become great. These are all things that are implied by the multiverse, the paradoxes. So maybe it's the first day of school. Sorry to lecture.
Wow. No, I love it. It's really a lot of food for thought. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Well, it's interesting when one thinks of what is and what is not at present. When I realize we're into a spurious dichotomy and that in reality everything is perfectly exactly the way it is now. In the perennial philosophy, we say, it's all from Leela in in sort of the inchoate types of play that make all the dichotomies, and all is exactly as it should be right now. Just open up and dig it. And if you are at odds with the present circumstances, that just shows what parts within you haven't accepted and integrated in a as much as you might once you transcend it and see how it's part of a false separation of what's really the same thing. That's my take anyhow.
Well, Sasha, I think it's another bullseye. I think if you were in the Coast Guard with me in the old days, you would have gotten a medal for that. I think what's really happening here is, and this comes up in some of the deepest explanations about God, and I get into this in the end of this next book, but people will come to me, oh, well, this is evil, or that's it. There's so much evil in the world, the horror, God must be either non-existent or doesn't care or is bad. And so, well, not so fast. And, I don't think this is what we used to call a cop-out, but if you look at the multiverse, what it really means, if you have, again, all these possibilities, everything that could possibly happen is real. And to go back to what if you learn in the seminary or any kind of upbringing, Judeo-Christian upbringing, even Muslim upbringing, you would see God created the universe out of a love that could not be contained. It had to express itself in this creation. Well, if God's love is infinite, wouldn't creation be infinite? And if it's infinite, it would involve every possibility, everywhere, every when, to everybody and everything. And if you look at that, if you look at that, it's that would make it a perfect creation. Everything in complete balance, in an elegant way, and it's what is you have the combination of all colors. I can't remember if it's black and white. Black or white, but it's one or the other. And I
think black is the absorption of all colors.
There you go.
White is the reflection.
Yeah. And it's, but again, it's a perfect combination. So maybe creation is perfect, and we are not aware enough yet to see it. Maybe we haven't reached that point in our evolution. I don't know. But just because everything's not made for our personal convenience, we say, "Aha, God is bad," or "God doesn't care," or "There is no God," or whatever. And it's funny. I have stood at the deathbeds of 4 atheists. And now I'm not saying I believe what I believe, what I was taught in the seminary, far from it. But I do I do believe in God very sincerely, he, she, it, or them, whatever you want to approach. But these atheists who were all good people, one of whom was a doctor, were all lucid, and they held my hand, and they asked about God, because they were terrified. And I said, look, just say thank you, and you'll never have to worry about anything. I'm a great believer in salvation through gratitude. And I think we could be very grateful if this is indeed the scenario, that God has created a perfect universe, and it's our job to become aware.
And did they follow your advice? Did they say thank you?
They did. And they were, I wouldn't call them good deaths as it goes, but I think they kind of got an inkling of it. I could tell it in their eyes before their eyes closed. It was, it was really...
But let me ask a couple of questions.
Just that's so beautiful. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you actually see them leave? Did you witness? Because a lot of times they'll see things. You can see them seeing it. They have an awareness.
Well, no, I can't say that I did. It was concentrating on them at the moment. There was, though, a very strange incident, and this again was at St. Lawrence State Hospital. It wasn't an exorcism or anything, but there was an old Irish fellow, and there were a lot of people in this hospital. It was a state hospital, so it wasn't all psychiatric patients, but people who maybe didn't have the money or weren't old enough for Medicare or whatever would have state aid and be in this hospital for medical reasons. Well, this fellow was paralyzed really from the neck down, and what happened was impossible. And there were two doctors, the doctor and two nurses and myself, who were witnessing this. Just before we don't even use the word passed, we use the word translated. Just before it's an ancient term. Just before he translated, he sat up with the most beautiful look in his eye. He couldn't sit up, he was paralyzed. With the most beautiful look in his eye, he looked off into the distance and said, Abba Ba. Now, Abba Ba is Hebrew. It means, essentially, I translate it as Daddy is coming. Absolutely. I'm choking up just thinking about watching this guy. Old Irish guy, he'd have been a blue-collar worker. I mean, how could he didn't know any Hebrew.
Right, yeah.
But again, connecting with perhaps where he is in another world where he did it. But again, the tough concept here is that we are already living all these lives, and they're already part of our subconscious. So, I mean, at least the way I see it, it wouldn't be as if you translate and all of a sudden, you become someone. You're already someone else. That's our experience anyway. There's a case in the book too of a guy who, and this was really confusing. This was the second time I'd done this, and it was Yonkers, New York. Now I have to say that before I graduated from Wadhams Hall Seminary, I decided that the Eastern Orthodox Church was a little more authentic. So two of us this never happened. You didn't have seminaries leaving the church. Excuse me. There were two of us in the class who joined the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, and as luck would have it, we were at the right academic level to continue into their graduate seminary. And, you used to be ordained in a few years, if they thought you were ready. They didn't ordain you en masse like the Roman Catholic Church does. But in any case, in the weekends, we would fan out across the greater New York area to, teach church school classes or do this or that or visit hospitals. Well, I was at one parish in Yonkers, Orthodox parish, and all of a sudden I saw one of my classmates pointing to me, and this little lady with a good old Russian name of Luba came over to me and said, "Oh, that young man says you know about ghosts." And I could have killed him because the Orthodox seminary faculty did not like this. They didn't like the Warrens, and I was keeping my head down. So he kind of smiled a little bit. He was a good friend of mine. And this turned out to be another attic thing. And they assumed it was the ghost of the guy who committed suicide in the garage or whatever. And, I suppose that's always possible. But, I mean, I just wasn't finding that. This one turned out to be a human who spoke relatively decent English like ours. And started out with he was in a church in Virginia, and he couldn't get out. And he was convinced that God was mad at him. But at the same time, he was saying how he was subsisting by eating food that was in the church kitchen, downstairs. There was like a social hall. And I said, what? If the guy's a ghost, what does he have to eat for? So as time went by, this took another 3 nights. The guy's memory changed as we spoke. Initially, he was afraid of me because he saw me as like this mist in a corner of the building by this pillar. And he kept saying, "Are you a ghost?" I said, "No, I'm not. Get a grip." And but he said that he had this memory of being in a plane that sounded like it was about to crash. And but then and he was mentioning Mohawk Airlines, which had gone out of existence a few years earlier, at least in our world. And all this stuff was going on, and his memory changed as we spoke. By the end of the conversation, he was the minister or the priest at this Episcopal church, and was waiting for. And I could hear a huge wooden door opening, and people coming in, and they were greeting each other. And then the connection was broken. So all of a sudden, he's stuck in this church, and he was in trouble from the plane going down. And all of a sudden, he's the minister, or the. I mean, what was this about? And again, this is 1975, and I wasn't any less confused by this stuff than I had been when I met Gilbert, a year or two before. So, I mean, it was like, again, this was real. And again, and here's an attic in Yonkers, New York, and he's in Virginia. So, I mean, again, perhaps he finally had the unity that he needed to be where he already was. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. But it's just, it really kind of rewrote the book for me.
So this communication is something auditory, or is it in your mind's eye? Is it? Well, is this telepathic?
Yeah, I hear it as words, and then I think in response. Now, again, very often, the rare occasions I've done this, it's been nonverbal because there have been non-human, but perfectly benign or neutral entities that you just happen to, I guess, be where there are intersect points that people think are ghosts, and other times, again, they're afraid of me. There have been several occasions where, I have a whole section in the book on what ghosts have to say about God, and impressions that I've gotten from this. There was in Rhode Island, there was apparently a native woman, and the name I had to look up some of the Algonquian language group words. But this was in Rhode Island, which would have been either the Narragansett or the Wampanoags, which was kind of the border area, and said her name was Wessawonk, which actually means name. So I didn't really get very far with that. And there was a certain amount of simpatico kind of feeling and communication that way, but it's generally verbal with me, and I had trouble getting through the line. She didn't speak English, but I made notes of everything during the communication. Then this was outdoors in an archaeological big area. I was only there because I, as luck would have it, I was vice chairman of the Historic District Zoning Commission of this town. And I got permission. I had connections at the Historical Society. I get permission to go in there anytime I wanted. Little did they know what I was really doing. So there have been some very, very different communications. There were, I was on a book tour in 2006 through the Imperial Valley of California, and I stopped to rest, and I ended up speaking in a form of French with some children who said they lived with a goddess, and this went on and on and on. One started, I was in Sedona, of course, Arizona, and started in a dream, and I woke up and the communication continued. So, I mean, I haven't really done this very often, considering the amount of time I've worked in this field, but everyone is different, and it just bespeaks a very different reality than we're used to dealing with.
Fascinating. So, how do you get your cases? Do people contact you? How do you hear about them, and which ones do you decide to take?
Well, at this point, people come out of the woodwork, but I mean, we have listeners, a lot of listeners in Australia, and for some reason in Mexico. They got interested in us because they were talking about the flying humanoids down there in the Monterey area. And I've been told that some of the people in Mexico, will get together on Sundays in a group to listen to our show, and apparently they're fluent in English, and they enjoy listening to it. So we'll hear from there sometimes, particularly Australia and different places, but I mean, it's not like we can jump in our Gulf Stream and go zipping down there. Like, we don't have those resources.
Right.
So you have to deal with things at a distance, which is difficult. And what's also very difficult is like the who you're going to call thing. We don't really trust an awful lot of people who are out there to deal with this stuff. Shane was such a treasure. We met in 1998 on a case in Rhode Island here, and we had known each other from Adam, and the guy called in both of us separately, and we both started to discuss it, and we were in complete agreement about this, and I was floored. I didn't think anybody else, short of Jacques Vallée, would have this approach. And so we've been brothers ever since, and he works with us and even co-hosts our show, all the open line shows we do maybe once a month. And he lives in New Hampshire, and he's just got an amazing approach, and he approaches the parasite problem as we do, and he has I'd call it, as long as the people cooperate, he's got a 100% success rate if you approach it this way. So Shane is really good, but we will, if the case is in northern New England, we'll turn the case over to him. But as far like in Hawaii or someplace far away, or Australia, we don't really know anyone.
Right.
To do that with, whom we would trust, because, very often, and a lot of these people who are so famous from TV will go in and they'll make a pig's breakfast out of this case. And there have been times that Shane or all of us have had to go in and straighten it out. Because I think a lot of times people just don't get it, what they're dealing with and what they have to do. And they just make a mess. One example was in the Boston area. And this is a number of years ago now. Ben and I went in, and I didn't have time, so Ben went back, and it was a ghost hunting group from Boston. Good people, but they're going, listen to this EVP, or look at this energy video I got. And the poor woman who's suffering is sitting there with nobody paying attention. So Ben took care of that, and he went and did a thing in Rome, and he found out exactly what it was after they were chasing around with all their silly gear that they didn't really understand. And he took care of it, and it's not always that easy because people have to cooperate. But it's about the people. It's not about the site, and that's how we approach it. So, but the thing is, we don't have a lot of time because we'll spend years on cases. The longest running one so far is we started in 2005. It's that Litchfield Triangle in Connecticut, Flap area, as we said. And it was one of Ben's first cases. People get a big kick out of some of the early photos we had of him. He's a little 13-year-old kid with the video camera and interviewing people and all that. So that and the Haunted Policeman of Vermont, those were his first two cases. So both started in 2005. So
well, what do you do when you go into a case like mine? For example, my sister still has the family house, and the house seemed to be a interdimensional portal with all these beings, and I'd say some were extraterrestrial, some were discarnates, and some were, we had no idea, interdimensionals or archons or whatever they were. I saw grays and all kinds of entities, and there also appeared to be a portal going down to the underworld, to the inner earth. Now, what would you do if you were to come into a site, an area like that? Do you set up equipment, or what do you do?
Well, as Ben would say, it's baby steps. Okay. Now, we don't use a lot of equipment. No, what we'll do is we'll go in, maybe sometimes just one of us, and we don't want to know what's happening. We don't want to, with the first communication, say, don't tell us anything. Okay. We go in and maybe it's just having done this for so long, but what to look for. The energies you can pick up and this sort of thing. The first thing we look for is the possibility of infrasound. Okay, we try to eliminate all paranormal, all non-paranormal factors before even thinking about the paranormal, because infrasound, which is not discernible by the human ear, can pick up, can be caused by a faulty motor in your fan. It can be caused by a subwoofer on the stereo. And at like 450 megahertz, which you can't hear, the human eyeball will start to vibrate, and you'll start to see things. Now, our question, because we've run into this many times, is that causing people to imagine paranormal phenomena, or is it cutting through membranes between parallel worlds, and things are manifesting? We've found possibilities for both. There's also black mold, which is a problem in areas that are very humid. including New England here. Black mold can cause hallucinogenic experiences. Many people don't even know they have it. So we try to eliminate all this stuff first. And once we've done that, we see what impressions we pick up and where we pick them up. And then we sit down with the people with a long questionnaire, their medical history, the history of the property. Not that always means anything, because what could be happening could be coming from what to us is the future, not necessarily even the past. We run into that a lot of times. And almost inevitably, I can't think of any occasion when this did not occur. We'll say, well, I got an impression in this room of this, and this. I say, oh, you're right. It's not necessarily that we're doing the psychic thing, but I guess you could call it that. We're being aware, and we're picking up impressions and energies that from experience or from past cases for many years, and for what that's worth. And then we'll take it from there. We'll immediately begin to work with the people. For example, in one case where there was a lot of negative activity, years ago I would have gone charging in with a cross and holy water. No, we don't necessarily do that because you got a kid using a Ouija board. Okay, bad stuff. Why? Because it's a sledgehammer technique for knocking down membranes. You don't know what's going to come through. As John Keel would describe, you open the window in the window area, and who knows what's going to come through. And so you deal with the kid who's doing that. Very often there is friction in the family. There are issues where, years ago you used to be able to deal with it, but you don't dare today because you're going to get sued. You have to call Child Protective Services or whatever the state equivalent or provincial equivalent may be. So none of this sounds very paranormal, but again, you have to deal with the people who, as Sasha said, really in the end have to fix it themselves. Sometimes there are parasites. There are parasites of about 9 different species that we have identified over the years, from a very higher echelon. I call them the wise, but they're wise in the ways of their own people. They're very good at mimicking Uncle George, who died 10 years ago, and all this stuff. They will get into your minds. They will feed upon your energy, and they learn about you very quickly. It's really quite disconcerting until you get their number and you realize what it is. And people have told us this almost invariably. Now that I understand it, I don't have to be afraid of it anymore. I love to hear that, And so that's how we begin the approach. And every case is different. In dealing with a parasite, we use what we call the Peter Pan theory. It sounds silly, but it's think happy thoughts. 1998, a case in Rhode Island, the woman was. We find that even if there are several parasites working in packs, which they do sometimes, they will concentrate on one person at a time in a household. And in this particular case, it was the mother of the household, a young woman who had a lot of abuse as a younger person. Now was in a loving environment and loving relationship, but had gone through a lot in a row there. Health issues, all these things can ring dinner bells for parasites if the energies at the site are right. And at one point, we were going around. It was on her, as she would say. Her hair was standing up, and it said it didn't want me. It didn't want. There was holy water in this case, okay, because they were Roman Catholics, and meant something to them. But I said, Steve, that was her husband. Take her hand. We took her hand. There was this flash of energy, and it went away. And he said, Paul, you could have told me about coming together and standing in solidarity against these things all day, but that really showed me that it works. That simple, kind act of taking her hand. Because that's what we say. Come together. Tell your loved ones that you love them. Don't wait. If there are issues, work them out. It's too important not to. And just even if you're somebody who's completely alone, you're never alone because of the multiverse. You're always loved, right, and you're never alone. And this is the approach we take. And I don't go in and do exorcisms anymore. I don't feel competent to do that anyway. If it's something we can't handle, we'll call in someone else. We often will use people with PhDs who are physicists or whatever who are interested in studying this. So we take a very simple, person-centered approach.
Do you find it like this house that my sister still owns? seems to have a life of its own, right? It doesn't matter who. It's not really to a person. It seems to be that place, but would we definitely want to like exercise it, or should we study it? This could be a portal and a way of figuring out this phenomenon, because it seems to be consistent. Like the areas that you described, there are certain areas that seem to be portals. I think it'd be a shame to just send everybody onto the other side when you have an opportunity to perhaps, conduct some studies of this area and see what's going on. Well, I just became aware. We have 2 minutes, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Okay. I would study it if nobody's in pain from it, but be very careful about sending people to quote the other side, because the question arises, which other side? There are billions and trillions, and the light is a world boundary. In our experience, you send them across, you could be sending them to a hell world, and you don't hear from them again, so everything's great. We don't know. You don't know that. So I would say, if no one is suffering from it, study it. If not, deal with the person. If it's a parasite, you might have to take further action. But I guess we're out of time. So.
Yeah, well, we have 1 minute. So tell us about yourself, how to reach you, your book.
Okay, thank you.
Talk fast.
Well, the best place to start is Behind the Paranormal.com, not beyond, Behind the Paranormal.com. That's a website with links to our case histories. We have over 800 hours of free shows we've done over the past 11 years, including CBS. And it's just go to town. There's another NewEnglandGhosts.com. A couple of the books are in stores. The new one is coming out the end of August, Dancing Past the Graveyard. That'll be in stores too, and we'll take it from there.
Well, it's very exciting. I love your work. And what's the conference you're going to be presenting? What's it called
that's going to be the X-Filers United 2019 conference, and that's going to be in Warwick, Rhode Island at the Crown Plaza Hotel, April 26th, 27th, and 28th. And I'm speaking on the 27th, Saturday at 4 p.m.
Well, make sure you go there, because it's going to be awesome. I wish I could be there, but it's way across the planet for me.
Well, somewhere in the multiverse, you're there.
Yes, we'll meet in the multiverse. Much love and blessings. Aloha, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free, but there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Take a look around, kid. What do you see? Homes being foreclosed. People working 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and still drowning in debt. Don't get me wrong. This country was founded on great ideals and principles. They've all been ruined by the banks. Open your eyes to banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This